Roars. The HOA president was already screaming before I even reached the gate. His name was Richard Mallory, and that morning he was standing in the middle of my gravel road with his face red. Roars. His hands shaking and half the HOA board crowded behind him. Behind them was a long line of SUVs, golf carts, and service trucks. All of them were blocked by the wooden gate I had locked at sunrise. Roars. On that gate I had posted one simple sign, private road, no HOA easement. Richard slapped the sign so hard that one corner tore loose. Then he pointed at me through the gate and shouted that I was blocking community access. Roars. He said I was ruining a scheduled lake event. He said I was holding the entire neighborhood hostage. One woman from the board kept waving her phone in the air, saying their attorney was already being called. Roars. Another man kicked at the gravel near the gate and yelled that I had no idea who I was dealing with. I did not yell back. I stayed on my side of the gate. In my hands I held my deed. Roars. My survey and a folder full of county records that seemed to make Richard even angrier. He kept saying the HOA had used that road for more than 20 years. He said residents had always driven down to the lake that way. Roars. He said I was just the new cabin owner who thought he could move in and change the rules. But that was exactly the point. I had not moved into their HOA. I had bought a small lake cabin outside it. Roars. And the road they had treated like community property was part of my land. Richard grabbed the gate with both hands and shook it hard. The chain snapped against the wooden post. Roars. People behind him started yelling too, one resident said. Her family had a boat waiting by the dock, and others shouted that they paid HOA dues for lake access. Someone else said I would be sued into bankruptcy by Monday morning. Roars. Then a sheriff's cruiser turned off the county road. A white pickup from the county surveyor's office pulled in right behind it. The yelling stopped almost immediately. The deputy stepped out slowly. Roars. He looked at the locked gate. Then he looked at Richard, and he asked the HOA to show the recorded easement that gave them legal access across my property. Richard opened his mouth. Roars. But for the first time that morning, nothing came out, because every threat he had made was built on one assumption, that using someone else's road for years meant owning it, and within the next 10 minutes. Roars. Everyone standing at that gate was about to learn how wrong that assumption was. I bought that lake cabin because I wanted quiet. That was the whole reason I did not want a gated community. Roars. I did not want monthly board meetings. I did not want arguments about fence colors, driveway stains, or whether a bird feeder matched the neighborhood aesthetic. I wanted trees. Roars. Water, a small dock, and a place where I could sit on the porch in the morning without hearing someone tell me I had violated a rule. I never agreed to follow. The cabin was old when I bought it. Roars. The roof needed work. The windows rattled when the wind came across the lake. The kitchen was small, the floors creaked, and the porch leaned just enough to make a home inspector sigh before writing notes on his clipboard. Roars. But I loved it the first time I saw it. It sat below the ridge, tucked between pine trees in a narrow stretch of shoreline. It was not part of the big HOA subdivision up the hill. Roars. That was one of the main reasons I bought it. The listing said it clearly. No HOA private lake access, included access road. At closing I asked about the gravel road that ran from the county lane down to the cabin. Roars. The seller was an older man named Mr. Harlan. He told me the HOA residents sometimes used the road to reach the lake area, but he said it had always been casual, mostly golf carts. Roars. A few people walking, the occasional neighbor pulling a kayak. He made it sound harmless. He said they had been doing it for years. Then he said something I should have taken more seriously. Roars, he said. They act like they own it, but they don't. At the time, I thought he was just tired of neighborhood politics. I had no interest in starting a fight, so I closed on the cabin. Roars. Moved in slowly and tried to be friendly. If someone waved from a golf cart, I waved back. If a family walked down toward the lake, I did not stop them. If a neighbor asked where to park for a quick swim. Roars. I pointed them away from my driveway and let it go. I was trying to be decent, but being decent is not the same as giving away your land. That road was part of my property. It appeared in my deed. Roars. It showed up on the county parcel map. It ran through my trees, past my mailbox, and down to my cabin. I paid taxes on it. I maintained it. I cleared fallen branches after storms. Roars. I patched potholes with gravel. I kept the drainage ditch open so the spring rains would not wash the road into the lake. The HOA did none of that. They did not pay for the gravel. Roars. They did not ask before trimming branches. They did not call before sending vehicles down. They just used the road like it had always belonged to them. At first I told myself it was not worth the stress. Roars. I had bought the cabin for peace, not conflict, but slowly the traffic changed. A few golf carts became a steady stream. Weekend walkers became trucks with boat trailers. Then came maintenance crews. Roars. Landscaping vans and service vehicles heading toward the HOA lakefront area. And every time I watched another vehicle roll past my porch without permission, I felt the same question building in my head. Roars. How long does being polite last before people start calling it permission? If you have ever bought a place outside in HOA just to get away from HOA control, and somehow the HOA still found a way to make your property their business, roars. You already know how frustrating that feels. Leave your thought in the comments, because sometimes the biggest property fights start with something people pretend is harmless, roars. For a while I kept hoping common sense would solve it. Then the HOA put up a sign, and that was when I realized they were not just using my road, they were claiming it. The sign appeared on a Friday morning. Roars. I noticed it while carrying a toolbox from my truck to the cabin. It was stuck into the ground near the turnoff from the county lane, right beside the start of my gravel road. Roars. Blue background. White letters. HOA Lake Access with an arrow pointing straight down my property. I stood there for a few seconds, just staring at it. At first, I thought maybe someone had made a mistake. Roars. Maybe the sign crew had placed it too far down the road. Maybe the HOA meant to direct people somewhere else. Then 2 golf carts turned in without slowing down. The first one had a cooler strapped to the back. Roars. The second had 2 kids sitting sideways with fishing poles across their knees. The driver gave me a quick wave like I was a groundskeeper standing beside a path. That was the first time I felt it. Roars. Not anger yet, more like disbelief. I walked down to the HOA clubhouse later that afternoon and asked who had installed the sign. The woman at the front desk told me I needed to speak with Richard Mallory, roars, the HOA president. Richard came out wearing sunglasses indoors and carrying a coffee cup like he had been interrupted during something important. I explained that the road was on my property, roars. I told him the cabin was outside the HOA. I said the sign needed to be removed until we cleared up the access issue. He smiled in the way people smile when they have already decided not to listen, roars. He told me the community had used that lake road for more than 20 years. He said residents paid dues for lake access. He said the HOA had no intention of letting a new owner interfere with long-standing neighborhood use. Roars. I told him long-standing use was not the same as ownership. His smile disappeared. Then he said I should be careful about creating problems with an entire association. That was the first warning. Roars. Over the next 2 weeks, the situation got worse. The HOA did not remove the sign. They added another one closer to the lake. Then they sent out a newsletter reminding residents that the lake access road would be open for weekend activities. Roars. My road open, as if I did not exist. By Saturday morning, vehicles were coming through every few minutes. SUVs with paddleboards, golf carts with Bluetooth speakers, pickup trucks pulling small boat trailers. Roars. A landscaping truck hauling mulch for the HOA lakefront picnic area. One truck stopped right in front of my driveway while the driver checked his phone. I walked out and asked him to move. Roars. He said the HOA told him to park there for unloading. That sentence started to feel like a disease. The HOA told him. The HOA proved it. The HOA said it was fine. Nobody asked what the deed said. Roars. Nobody checked the property line. Nobody cared that I was the person paying to maintain the road they were tearing up. After the first heavy rain, I found deep tire marks along the shoulder. Roars. The gravel had shifted near the lower curve. One section near the ditch had started to sink. A pine branch had been cut back without my permission, and fresh sawdust was scattered at the base of the tree. Roars. When I called Richard, he acted annoyed before I finished my first sentence. He said the HOA maintenance crew had trimmed the branch for safety. He said the road needed to remain clear. Roars, he said. If I had concerns, I should submit them in writing for board review. Board review for my tree on my land. I sent an email that night. I asked the HOA to remove the signs. Roars. Stop sending vehicles down the road and provide any recorded easement they believed gave them access. Richard replied the next morning. He did not send an easement, he sent attitude. Roars. He wrote that the HOA had historical access rights. He wrote that residents had relied on that road for decades. He wrote that blocking the road could expose me to legal action. Roars. Damages and claims from the association. Then he ended the email by saying the HOA expected me to act like a good neighbor. That line stayed with me, because apparently being a good neighbor meant letting them use my property. Roars. Damage my road, cut my trees, direct traffic past my cabin, and threaten me when I asked for proof. The final straw came on Memorial Day weekend. The HOA held a lake event without telling me. Roars. By 9 in the morning, my quiet gravel road looked like a parking lot. Cars were backed up near the county lane. Golf carts were parked along the trees. People walked across my grass carrying folding chairs. Roars. Coolers, towels, and bags of charcoal. Music drifted up from the shoreline. Children ran past my porch. Someone leaned a bicycle against my fence, and when I tried to leave for the hardware store, roars. A black SUV was blocking my driveway. I walked down to the lake and found Richard standing near a table of bottled water, laughing with two board members. When he saw me, he did not look surprised. Roars. He looked irritated. I told him this had to stop. I told him again that the road was private. I told him he had until the end of the weekend to remove the signs and send me legal proof of access. Roars. Richard stepped closer and lowered his voice. He said I had bought next to an established community, and I needed to learn how things worked around there. Then he told me if I did not like it. Roars. Maybe I had bought the wrong cabin. That was the moment something changed. I looked past him at the crowd, at the golf carts, at the vehicles parked along my road, at the sign pointing people across land they did not own. Roars. And I finally understood this was not a misunderstanding. This was not neighborly use. This was an HOA taking something because nobody before me had forced them to prove they had the right. Roars. So I stopped asking Richard to be reasonable, and I started asking the county for records. The next Monday I did not call Richard. I did not go back to the clubhouse. I did not walk around the neighborhood asking people what they thought. Roars. I had already learned enough from talking, now I needed records. I started with the closing documents from my purchase. They were still in a cardboard box in the corner of my office. Roars. Mixed with inspection reports, insurance papers, and old receipts from the move. I spread everything across the kitchen table and began sorting page by page. Deed, title policy. Roars. Survey, county parcel map, legal description. At first it all looked like the kind of paperwork people sign without really reading long paragraphs, lot numbers, boundary calls. Roars. Easement language that made my eyes tired after 2 lines. But I forced myself to slow down, because Richard had not threatened me with facts, he had threatened me with confidence. Roars. And confidence is not proof. I read the deed first, then the survey, then the title exceptions. If the HOA had a recorded right to use that road, it should have appeared somewhere. Roars. A road easement, an access agreement, a shared maintenance covenant. Something, I found nothing. The gravel road was shown inside my property boundary. The cabin was outside the HOA. Roars. The shoreline parcel was mine. The driveway and lower access route were mine too. The next morning I drove to the county recorder's office. I brought the parcel number, the old owner's name. Roars. The subdivision name, and copies of everything from closing. The clerk behind the counter was patient. She had probably seen enough property disputes to know when someone was trying not to sound desperate. Roars. I asked for every recorded easement, road agreement, access document, subdivision amendment, and plat note connected to my cabin, and the HOA land above it. She searched. Then she searched again. Roars. After nearly an hour, she printed a stack of documents and slid them across the counter. There were utility easements, drainage easements, a setback note near the lake, old subdivision maps. Roars. But nothing giving the HOA the right to use my road. No recorded access easement, no road maintenance agreement, no deeded lake access across my parcel. I remember staring at the page like it might change if I looked long enough. Roars. It did not. The road they had treated like community property was legally mine. Still, I knew better than to rely on one clerk's search and my own interpretation, so I hired a licensed surveyor. Roars. He came out 2 days later with his equipment, orange flags, and a calm expression that made me feel slightly less crazy. He walked the property line from the county lane down toward the water. Roars. He marked the edge of my parcel near the gravel road. He found old pins near the trees. He checked the curve where the HOA trucks had been cutting through the shoulder. Then he said the sentence I had been waiting to hear. Roars. The road is inside your boundary, not partly, not maybe inside. I asked about the HOA sign. He looked at it, then looked back at his map. That sign is on your property too. That was when I started documenting everything more seriously. Roars. I installed 2 cameras, one near the turnoff from the county lane, one facing the lower curve toward the cabin. I did not hide them. I did not set traps. I simply recorded what was happening on my own land. Roars. Within 3 days, I had footage of 27 golf carts, 9 subs, 4 landscaping vehicles, 2 boat trailers, and 1 HOA maintenance truck using the road. I saved clips by date and time. Roars. I took photos of the signs. I photographed tire ruts after rain. I measured the sinking shoulder near the ditch. I took pictures of the cut pine branch and the saw marks left behind. Roars. Then I sent everything to a real estate attorney. I expected the attorney to tell me this would be messy, and he did, but he also told me something important. Long use alone did not automatically give the HOA ownership of the road. Roars. And if the previous owner had allowed casual use, that could actually weaken any claim that the HOA had been using it against the owner's rights. Permission is different from legal entitlement. Roars. That became the center of the case. The attorney wrote a letter to the HOA. It was firm but not emotional. It asked them to remove the signs from my property, stop sending vehicles down the road. Roars. Repair any damage caused by HOA-related use, and provide any recorded easement or legal document they believed gave them access. The letter gave them 10 days. I honestly thought that might be enough. Roars. I thought once their attorney looked at the records, someone on that board would realize they had a problem. But Richard did what Richard always did. He doubled down on the 9th day. Roars. The HOA's management company sent a response claiming the association had historical access rights. They said residents had relied on the road for decades. They said my attempt to restrict access was unreasonable. Roars. Hostile and damaging to community interests. But they did not include an easement. They did not include a recorded agreement. They did not include a survey, just words, and one sentence near the end of the letter stood out more than all the rest. Roars. The HOA reserved the right to continue using the lake access road unless ordered otherwise by a court. I read that sentence twice. Then I sent it to my attorney. His reply was short. Roars, he said. Now we have their position in writing. That was the moment I understood what we were really building, not an argument, a file, deed, survey, county records, photos, video. Roars. Attorney letter HOA refusal. Piece by piece, Richard was helping me prove that the HOA knew I challenged their access and decided to keep using my land anyway, and once they put that in writing. Roars. The next step became unavoidable. The legal twist was not loud. It did not arrive with a dramatic phone call. It arrived in a quiet email from my attorney, with 3 attached documents and one sentence that made me sit back from my desk. Roars, he wrote. They have not shown any recorded easement because there does not appear to be one. That was the whole case. The HOA had signs, they had habits, they had angry residents. Roars. They had 20 years of acting like the road belonged to them, but they did not have the one thing that mattered. A recorded legal right. My attorney explained it carefully. The HOA could claim historical use. Roars. They could threaten a lawsuit. They could argue that residents had relied on the road, but claiming access and proving access were not the same thing. The old owner had allowed some casual use. Roars. That mattered, because permission does not usually create hostile use, and without hostile use, a prescriptive easement claim becomes much harder, especially when the use was inconsistent. Roars. Informal and never clearly defined. A few neighbors walking down to the lake was one thing. An HOA installing signs, sending service trucks, hosting events, and directing traffic across private land was something else entirely. Roars. That was not casual, that was control, and they had never paid for it, documented it, or secured it. My attorney drafted a final notice. It stated that the road was private property. Roars. It stated that no recorded easement had been found. It stated that the HOA signs were unauthorized. It stated that continued vehicle traffic, maintenance activity, and organized lake events would be treated as trespass. Roars. Then it gave them a final deadline, 72 hours, remove the signs, stop using the road, provide legal proof of access if they had it. If they did not, the gate would be closed. Roars. I expected panic. I expected a phone call. I expected their attorney to send something more serious. Instead, Richard sent an email to the community. One of the residents forwarded it to me that same night. Roars. In the email, Richard told everyone that the new cabin owner was attempting to interfere with established lake access. He said the HOA was confident in its rights. Roars. He said the board would not allow one person to disrupt the amenities residents paid for. Then he encouraged residents to continue using the road as normal. That was his biggest mistake. Roars. Because now it was not just a misunderstanding. It was a written instruction from the HOA president telling residents to keep entering private property after formal notice. My attorney told me not to respond emotionally. Roars. So I did not. I printed the email, saved the forwarded copy, added it to the folder. Then I ordered a stronger lock on the morning the deadline expired. I walked down the gravel road before sunrise. Roars. The air was cool. The lake was still. For once there were no golf carts, no engines, no voices echoing through the trees, just my boots on the gravel. I stopped at the wooden gate and looked up the hill toward the HOA. Roars. For weeks I had asked for one thing, proof, not opinions, not tradition, not threats, proof. They had given me none. So I closed the gate. I wrapped the chain around the post. Roars. Clicked the lock shut and attached a laminated sign. Private road, no HOA easement, no unauthorized access. I took photos from both sides. Then my attorney sent copies of the closure notice to the HOA. Roars. The management company, the sheriff's office, and the county surveyor. I did not close a public road. I did not block emergency access to anyone's home. I did not touch HOA property. Roars. I simply stopped letting an association use my land without permission. The response came faster than I expected. First, 2 golf carts rolled down and stopped at the gate. The drivers looked confused. Roars. Took pictures and backed up, then a white SUV arrived. A woman got out, read the sign, and started yelling into her phone. By 7 o'clock, Richard Mallory was there. By 7:30. Roars. Half the board was with him. By 8, the road above my gate was packed with angry residents who had been told for years that lake access was guaranteed. Richard grabbed the gate and shouted that I had made the biggest mistake of my life. Roars. But this time I did not have to explain much because the sheriff's cruiser was already on its way, and so was the county surveyor. When they arrived, Richard tried to speak first. Roars. He talked about community rights, decades of use, paid amenities, neighborhood reliance. He made it sound official, emotional, and urgent. The deputy listened. Then he asked one question. Roars. Do you have a recorded easement? Richard looked at the management company representative. She looked at the board members. The board members looked at the ground. No one had it. Roars. Because it did not exist. That was the turn. The HOA had spent years convincing residents they owned access they had never secured, and in one morning at one locked wooden gate. Roars. That assumption collapsed in front of everyone. The deputy did not unlock the gate. That was the first thing everyone noticed. Richard had been acting like the sheriff's arrival would end the situation in his favor. Roars. He stood near the front of the crowd with his arms crossed, looking at me like I had minutes left before someone forced the lock open. But the deputy did not reach for the chain. Roars. He did not order me to move. He simply asked Richard for proof, a recorded easement, a court order, a written access agreement, anything that showed the HOA had the legal right to cross my land. Roars. Richard kept talking around the question. He said residents had used the road for decades. He said the lake area was listed as an HOA amenity. He said families had paid dues based on access to that shoreline. Roars. He said this was an emergency because a community event had already been scheduled. The deputy listened quietly. Then he said, that still does not show me a legal right to enter private property. Roars. The crowd went still. A few residents looked at each other. One man lowered his phone. A woman who had been yelling about her boat stopped mid-sentence. Then the county surveyor stepped forward. Roars. He opened his map on the hood of his truck and showed the parcel line. He pointed to the county lane. Then he traced the gravel road with his finger. Every inch of it ran through my property. Roars. The wooden gate was mine, the turnoff was mine, the lower curve was mine. Even the spot where the HOA had placed its blue lake access sign was inside my boundary. Richard tried to interrupt. Roars. He said the map had to be wrong. He said the previous owner never blocked the road. He said the HOA had maintained access for years. The surveyor looked at him and asked who maintained the road surface. Roars. Richard hesitated. I answered before he could. I did. I paid for the gravel. I cleared the drainage ditch. I cut fallen branches after storms. I repaired the shoulder when heavy vehicles tore it up. Roars. The surveyor nodded and wrote that down. That seemed to bother Richard more than anything, because the whole story he had told residents depended on the idea that this was a shared road. Roars. A community route, a long-standing right, but standing there with county records spread across a truck hood, it looked exactly like what it was. A private road the HOA had been using without paperwork. Roars. The deputy told Richard that unless the HOA had a court order, no one should cut the lock, move the gate, or enter through it by force. If they did, it could become a trespass issue. Roars. That was when the anger in the crowd started turning not toward me. Toward the board, one resident asked why the HOA had never recorded an easement. Roars. Another asked why the lake access had been advertised in newsletters if the road was privately owned. Roars. Someone else wanted to know why their dues had been increased for lake maintenance when the association apparently did not control the only access road. Richard raised both hands and told everyone not to panic. Roars. That was the worst possible thing to say. People panicked immediately. By that afternoon, the HOA's attorney had contacted my attorney. The tone was different now. No more threats about bankruptcy. Roars. No more claims that I was interfering with the community. They wanted to discuss a temporary access arrangement. My attorney's answer was simple. Not until the signs were removed. Roars. Not until the damage to the road was assessed. Not until the HOA admitted in writing that it did not own the road. And not until any future use was covered by a signed agreement. Roars. Insurance and payment. 2 days later, there was an emergency HOA meeting. I did not plan to speak, but my attorney attended with me, and the clubhouse was packed before we arrived. Roars. Residents filled every chair. Some stood against the walls. A few were holding printed copies of Richard's email telling them to keep using the road. Others had copies of the lake amenity brochure. Roars. The one that described convenient private lake access as part of the community lifestyle. That phrase became a problem, because the HOA had sold residents on an amenity it could not prove it had the right to reach. Roars. My attorney showed the deed, then the survey. Then the county record search showing no recorded easement. Then the final notice Richard had ignored. No shouting was needed. The documents did all the work. Drawers. Richard tried one last time to argue historical access. He said everyone knew the road had always been used by the neighborhood. A resident in the back stood up and asked, "Then why didn't you record it?" Roars. Richard had no answer. The room turned cold. For the first time, the board was not facing one cabin owner. They were facing the people who had paid them dues for years. Roars. And those people wanted to know why nobody had checked the paperwork before promising them a road the HOA did not own. The fallout was faster than I expected. Within a week, the HOA removed both lake access signs from my property. Roars. They did it quietly, early in the morning, with 2 maintenance workers and a board member who would not look toward my porch. The road stayed closed while the attorneys worked. Roars. No golf carts, no boat trailers, no service trucks. For the first time since I bought the cabin, the gravel road was quiet again. I could sit on the porch and hear the lake instead of engines. Roars. I could walk to the dock without strangers passing me with coolers and folding chairs. I could leave my driveway without wondering if someone had parked across it, because the HOA told them it was fine. Roars. But the HOA still had a problem. Their residents were furious. They had paid higher dues for lake access. They had reserved events. They had told guests about the shoreline amenities. Roars. And now they were learning that the board had relied on assumption, habit, and Richard L.'s confidence instead of an actual recorded easement. At the next meeting, Richard tried to survive it. Roars. He said the situation was complicated. He said the previous owner had allowed access. He said nobody could have predicted that a new cabin owner would close the road. That was when an older resident stood up with a copy of the county map in her hand. Roars, she said. No, what nobody predicted was that the board never checked. That line ended him. By the end of the month, Richard resigned as HOA president. 2 other board members stepped down soon after. Roars. The management company agreed to review every easement, amenity agreement, and access document connected to the association. Then came the negotiations. The HOA wanted full access restored. Roars. I said no, not the way it had been before. My attorney made the terms clear. If they wanted to use my road, it would be under a written license, limited hours, no service trucks without approval. Roars. No events without advance notice, no signs on my land, no cutting trees, no parking along the shoulder, proof of insurance, annual maintenance payments, and immediate suspension if they violated the agreement. Roars. They hated it, but they had no leverage. In the end, they signed. They also paid to repair the damaged shoulder, reimburse my survey cost, and cover part of my attorney fees. The lake access reopened later. Roars. But it was no longer treated like something the HOA owned. Every resident got a notice explaining that access crossed private property and had to follow strict conditions. I kept the gate. Roars. I changed the sign. It no longer said no HOA easement. It said private road access by written permission only. That was all I ever wanted. Not revenge, not control over other people's weekends. Roars. Just respect for the land I bought, the cabin I worked for, and the boundaries that were already written in the county records before Richard ever pointed a finger in my face. Roars. I learned something from all of it, and HOA can sound powerful. A board president can make threats. A crowd can make you feel like you are wrong just because you are standing alone. Roars. But property rights do not come from volume. They come from deeds, surveys, recorded documents, and proof. So if you ever buy land near an HOA, do not assume being outside the association means they will leave you alone. Roars. Check the records, read the deed, walk the property line, save every email, and never confuse neighborly kindness with giving up your rights. Because sometimes the most important thing you can close is not a gate. Roars. It is the gap between what people assume they own and what the law actually says. If this story made you think of someone dealing with an HOA, share it with them. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Roars. Save this for later and subscribe for more stories where ordinary homeowners learn that the strongest boundary is the one you can prove.